does that. As great as he is, his endurance, just human body doesn't have that much in him. He actually, in those games, is worth 3/4 of a point per trip down the court. He shouldn't be in the NBA if you just looked at those couple of games. I mean, it's that far a drop-off. This is what's so amazing about Kemba Walker this year. Kemba kept the ball. If you look at Kemba's number here, he's a 1.17. So every time Kemba handled the ball, UConn would score 1.17 points on average. Okay, that's a good number. That's not in the top 100. Now, does anyone think Kemba's not one of the best 100 college players this year? No. Well, basically, I had to come up with a formula that says, okay, how many points is he adding? You have to figure how many possessions he has and how many minutes he plays. Because if someone else is playing in front of Kemba, the way those other 3 batters had played instead of Reggie Jackson, how much would you have lost? How many points would you give up during a year? And when you run the math, the amazing thing about Kemba is not the 116, or for some reason in college we do hundreds and they do singles in NBA, but say 1.17 points. Kemba is at 1.17, but he's right here on the scale. He's actually handling the ball 32% of the time. So where Kobe's down to 105, granted we're NBA versus college, he's still at 1.17. And then you also factor in minutes, which you'd have to do a 3D chart to show that here. Kemba's on the court 92.4% of the minutes. It's unheard of. So the fact that he's here resting 3 minutes a game, the guy's phenomenal. Now granted, could he have hit the last shot to beat Marquette if he weren't as tired? Maybe, experiment. Could he have gotten past Jimmy? Maybe. He didn't. He failed. But that was very rare for Kemba to fail. There are only a few moments. I have that game on videotape, by the way. I actually had someone argue with me that the 77 team could actually come back today and beat today's team. And I put in the 77 DVD in that one. I said, I just want you to understand something. Stats aside, guys keep getting better. The athletes are so much better. Please watch these by each other. I mean, nothing against 77, but come on. So you got high school guys who can beat college now, who can beat college teams. But anyway, that's an aside. Well, basically, when you run all the math, and once I ran these formulas, what we saw is that Kemba actually added over 8% to UConn's point total. Now, to give you a feel, UConn averaged this year winning games 72.4 to 64.9. Pretty good margin against tough competition. You take Kemba out and replace him with an average Big East bench player, they average winning games 66.9 to 64.9. They probably barely go 500 without him this year. That big a drop-off. Now, at first blush, you may think, oh, sounds like Reggie Jackson was so much more valuable than Kemba. I mean, he took him from 71 runs to 108. That's a lot more than 8%. Now, I want you to understand this figure. He added that much percent to the whole team. He moved 13 guys over 8%. You take what Reggie Jackson did for his whole team, adding those 37 runs, he improved them 3.5%. Kemba literally was over twice as valuable to UConn this year as Reggie Jackson was to the Yankees in '77. And that's the other neat thing. Once you get down to wins and runs, etc., you can actually compare athletes across sports lines. So if any of you are lucky enough to get with one of these conglomerates that runs 3 teams in a city, you can actually be an expert for 3 different teams and know how to allocate your money between ball clubs, if that's legal. I'm not sure if it is. But anyway, so anyway, just to give you a feel for where he was. So that's the percentage you can add. Now, just for the last couple, basically through these formulas, and it would take me another hour to go through the formulas, I'm not, but in essence, we have an offensive rating for each player. We have a defensive rating, which is not as accurate because we don't measure everything we wish we could on defense, but basically it's something similar. And from that, we can figure out how many points does this player add to the team, how many does he take away from the opponents, versus if a typical BCS level bench player is in front of him. So not an average player, someone maybe a little below average, but someone much better than would play for a non-BCS school usually. And what you see is Crowder last year added over 4% to Marquette's total. You can pretty much say, take all his numbers out, put an average player, replacement player in there, and Marquette scores more than 4% fewer points. As you can see, defense was not as solid this year. Anyone who watched knew that. It may come around next year, but he took away about 1.5%. I'm just listing returning players here, not the ones that came back. But you start to be able to quantify as far as adding points and subtracting points. Now, I want to be clear, most players don't add any percent. Okay, most players are kind of replacement level, and you need average players. And a lot of freshmen are average. I mean, players obviously improve every year. Many championships have been lost because you didn't have an average player someplace. So the average guys doesn't mean they have no value. It means they're just not by themselves pulling the team forward. And that's something Bill James always stressed. There are plenty of times when the team had just a terrible shortstop and everyone else was great, but they didn't have a shortstop who could field worth the darns, they lost. So anyway, this is not to say some of the guys who don't have a big percentage increase do not help, not fill a role. I think some could argue that when you look at where some of the guys from the last few years are, if Marquette had ever had an average center, even 0% for several years, until these last couple of years, gosh, what could that team have done? Instead of having 6'5" guy, try to stop 6'11" guys. So average is fine. But anyway, this just gives you a feel. The good news is when players come back, once they've started to add value, it'll normally almost double the next year. And so, for example, you could see a Crowder probably not go all the way to 8% where Kemba was, but he might go to 6 to 7. There's just a normal progression. And then, of course, you always balance it, though. And this is one thing. The only thing I don't like about Moneyball, where kind of the one scout saying, well, we don't like the one player because he's got an ugly girlfriend. I mean, that's one of the in the trailer. Come on, I don't think that happens. I think the guys who have biases. They're saying something. They're saying that but you always need to balance them, and that's one thing I did when I wrote the book. I gave part rate to just stats, but then I also gave partial credit to were they picked for All-American teams. Were they drafted? I mean, what did other people who knew the game think about them? You always have to balance these. So, and then you have to look at the whole year. I mean, DJO, if we just put up his Big East stats, his percentage is much higher. He had a terrible start to the season. Well, you hope in a case like that, boy, the guy was just improving the whole last couple of months. You're probably much higher than that figure. You make these judgments. Devontae, here he's in great shape. Hope that's right, because, if he's in great shape, he's dominating. Let me tell you. I mean, the guy was almost with Crowder here. The guy was above Kemba Walker when he was on the court. Now, again, it's diminishing returns. I'm not saying he was Kemba, but the guy was dominant when he was out there. So, you make some of these subjective judgments, too, and say, don't just go numbers. There's one other thing I just want to throw in on freshmen here. There's some neat stuff on Massey ratings.com where you can take your favorite high school, put it up against your buddies, and it'll tell you what the score probably would have been anywhere in the country. This is a great tool because you want to know with your freshmen how good their freshman team was. And what I did is I put every team from our guys coming in up against St. Anthony's in Jersey City, which is door-to-dooring this weekend, but best team in the country, and said, how would they do? And what I saw is Juan Anderson's team out of California actually would play even the best team in the country very competitively. Massey predicts, after entering every high school game played this year, that they probably only lose that game about 51-62. Well, you want enough points to win a game, right? So basically, Anderson's scoring 17.4 a game against really tough competition. They'd probably only give up 62. He'd be scoring about 28% of the points you'd need in a high school game to upset the best team in the country. And as you can see, the other guys are pretty close. See, these are all excellent numbers. I mean, normally people are below 20%. And I don't have really a translation for assists and rebounds, but obviously you look at Derek Wilson, and he's almost as high. Go ahead, and 6-foot guy, 9 assists and 7 rebounds a game. Are you kidding me? So that's pretty encouraging. Even though, as you can see, though, he was up against lesser competition. I mean, the New England schools, probably aren't as good. Mayo, again, a little lesser competition. Still close in there, but you kind of rank them here just looking at stats. And again, not saying this is better than if you had a scout who'd actually watched them. He'd probably know more, but you get a feel for where your freshman might be. And as far as Mayo being third, hey, if you get the brother of a guy who's the #1 recruit in the country, I'll take my chances. So I think we got a shot there. On to the last slide. Thank you, you've been patient with me. So we go back to what is success. And again, I postulate here that success in basketball is going as far as you can in the NCAA tournament. Now, if you're in a low D1 school, that may be impractical. Maybe you're just trying to win your conference or something. So, you want to keep that goal in mind. You keep your means, scoring points, stopping opponents from scoring points. And this is how you have to look at every statistical issue you tackle. I don't care if any of you are crazy enough to get into politics and go door to door like I do, hopefully not. Business, figure out what that end goal is. The one reason I do think there's some correlation between sports and politics is you win or you lose. I mean, if you go into some other kind of business, it may be that A 23% market share is pretty good, 25% is really good, 30% is great, so you're kind of judged incrementally. Let me tell you, from sitting through a lot of election nights, 49%, same as 0%. You lose or you win. And end of a game, same thing. You can say overall the season was good or bad, but every night, I mean, you win or you lose. And I hate to be on record saying that because I get picked on for pointing out when market never loses by double figures. People say, so you want moral victories. Well, that's only important because if you do that against a team that's number 10 in the country, it probably means you're going to beat the number 20 team. Really, the end result is you win or you lose in a political campaign or in a sports game. And again, just to re-stress, you figure out what your means are to those important means. In basketball, don't allow turnovers, get to the line, effective shooting, and basically you count more for a three-pointer there than a two-pointer, but that's getting in the weeds. Get offensive rebounds when you do miss, and then the defense basically, stopping all the other things. Other factors are small, and so I just take this as one example. This is how you need to go about dissecting, figuring out any kind of micro-targeting. Are you measuring the right things to get you to the end result, whatever that is? And that I'm happy to take any questions or shut up, Scott, so you, if it has anything. And none of this is on the test because it's already happened. So that's good news, right? So yeah, please.
What was the Wisconsin player that you said was ahead of us?
It was Jordan Taylor. He's he's a great player if you look at numbers, but again, if you like that kind of basketball. So yeah. Yeah, so that's right.
Where did Jimmer rank on those stats?
Jimmer was actually third. And this is something that I think was interesting. And this is almost one other unspoken rule. You need to develop your formulas before you look at the results. I occasionally run something and say, oh, you jerry-rigged everything. No. I do the spreadsheet of all 2,500 players how many have, and then I hit a sort button, and that's the first time I know what order they're in. Now, if you saw that Kimball was the 80th or 200th best player, then you might say, okay, there's a formula problem, probably. But you have to do that. And believe me, if I didn't feel it so strongly, Jordan would have dropped a few spots. But yeah, Jimmer was number 3. And that's partly, he's the same thing. So many possessions, so many minutes, there is a fall off. And this is something I've gotten people on sometimes when they go after me on the web a little bit. They'll say, oh, well, Matthews had a higher offensive rating than Jarrell. I don't want to get an argument between them in college, but the point, you can't judge him. Jarrell had the ball so much more that there was more defensive attention. And, you can argue it either way, but you can't just say offensive rating, therefore. But, yeah, Jimmer was third, which the scary thing is Sullinger was 4th. And normally when someone gets to that level, they never stay in college. I mean, I'm a little distraught if somehow Ohio State gets in. I mean, he is so much better than everyone in college basketball right now. The guy was a top 3 pick. And he actually is projected, if he follows normal course, to add 14% of points to Ohio State. I mean, it's a historic figure if he has his normal progression coming back. So I was very sad to see him pull himself out of the draft.
Do you ever take into account if they're going to go or not when you make statistics?
One thing I do analyze is it does seem like when they hit a certain point they go, and I don't have, again, enough evidence down there, but that's one thing I found when I did analysis of 5-star players and how they'd progressed. Basically what I found on a little more primitive system than this, on how many win credits you give them, is that once they got up to where they were winning about 8 games a year for you, they were gone. They just never came back. So it did seem to correlate. And so you basically had 5 stars. When I did a study on how they progress, I got up to 4th year 5 stars, and I basically said, there's not enough to test. I mean, a 5-star by his senior year is either in the NBA or he is a bust. He's gone somewhere. Very few are still around. So yeah, but that's about what happens. They hit a certain point, and again, you want stats that seem to, in general, back up the common sense, and it does seem like they hit a point statistically, and they're gone. It's Carmelo Anthony or anyone. They're gone. So, yeah.
Have you ever got any official recognition from Marquette or otherwise that they think what you're doing is right, or anybody uses it, or that it makes sense to them? That kind of thing?
I purposely don't communicate with anyone, coaches or anyone. I mean, I mean, not to say they're calling them not returning calls. Don't get me wrong, but I've always worried a little that if you're in that relationship, aren't you kind of biased toward, so I have. And I mean, NBC Sports has picked up my stuff and run on blogs. Some of the blogs in New York, Philadelphia, and Chicago.